In this installment, we're going to take a look at virtual networking, some basic virtual networking configurations, and some common pitfalls. Networking in a virtualized environment is really no more different than networking in a non-virtualized or physical environment. But there are some terminology items that we need to cover to set everybody on a common ground. First of all, let's move our VMs out of the way. Now, there's something that we have in a virtual environment called a virtual switch, or a virtual network, or a bridge, whatever you want to call it. It's the same thing regardless of where it is. You've got a software-based device which has ports on it that acts just like a workgroup switch, if you want to think of it that way. Now, we have different types. We have what's called a private virtual switch or virtual network. In that case, only virtual machines can connect to it. So it can only form a connection between the ports and a virtual machine, VM. And that's it. There is no connection. It cannot connect to a physical network card and get outside the host. It cannot connect to the parent partition and talk to the parent partition over the network. It's only VM to VM communication. Next, we have what's called an internal virtual network. In that case, once again, we go from switch to VM. Okay, so we can still talk to our virtual machines, but we also add in the parent partition. So we can talk to our parent partition as well over the wire. There might be cases where you want to do this in a test or development environment, but most of the time it probably wouldn't be necessary to have your VMs talk directly to your parent partition. The other case is when you want your VMs to be able to communicate to the outside world or outside of that host server. And in that case, we want to create an external virtual network. So basically what happens is a port here is allowed to bind to one of these physical networks of the host. And then that physical network of the host you patch into wherever your physical network switch is. So all of its traffic goes through the switch and out the host through this one physical network. You still have your internal bindings to your virtual machines. Okay, so they're still involved as well. So this is how they're allowed to go through the virtual switch and communicate out through the host. One thing that happens frequently in the forums is folks want to do complex networking environments or networking configurations. One thing that we need to talk about is isolation. I haven't mentioned the management interface. And the management interface is how the parent partition is exposed to the world. The parent partition can be exposed to the world directly. Okay, this is what we refer to as a dedicated management interface. So this physical NIC belongs to the parent partition, and he is the only thing that produces network traffic over that. That's what we call a dedicated physical network. The other option is that a switch is placed in between here. So there's now an external switch which has a port that's bound to this physical NIC and an internal port that's given to the parent partition. So now the parent partition has a virtual NIC because it's attached to this virtual switch, and this physical NIC is bound to the outside. The side effect of doing that is, say I have hardware with only one physical NIC, or I have a demonstration box or a test box, is now I have the ability to branch in my VMs on that external network, and everybody can share in that single resource. Now, for a complexing network configuration is something that we frequently see show up in the forums. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take our host, we're going to do a high security configuration. We'll take our parent partition, we'll give him a dedicated management network. We're going to take one of our network interfaces, and this is going to reside in our DMZ. So that's in our DMZ on our firewall. He's out in the world. So now we want to create a switch, and we want to create an external virtual network switch. By that I mean that this switch links to a port that can talk outside the host. Now I have a VM that I want to put in here. Okay, that links out there, and this VM, in my case, he's going to be a firewall, or he's going to be an ISA server. So traffic from the outside world that's in our DMZ is going to come in through here. It's going to go through this particular VM, and it's going to go back out on another external virtual network, back to my enterprise. And once again, we'll have another external network. So we have a port, and we have a binding over to this other physical NIC, and he's the one that's going to go out to my enterprise. Now we can take this concept of physical isolation and take it as far as we want. We can also take this concept of physical isolation and link it to VLAN tagging, because it's, really similar to the concept of subnetting. So how you configure your networking stack within your VM still has to be appropriate. So whatever your IP address range is out here in this physical realm has to be reflected here on this particular NIC. And whatever IP addressing range is out in this physical realm needs to be reflected, will trace back on this virtual NIC of this VM. So we still have to have those configurations consistent. Now another pitfall that a lot of people have been running into is in regards to the physical topology. Many physical network switches, we'll bring this one in for example, have a new feature called MAC address filtering. That's a security feature to prevent somebody from inside a company from basically taking a 10-port switch like this, plugging it into a port in the wall, and having 10 machines sitting in their office, because they're only allowed to have, say, 1 or 2, for example. Well, guess what we've done? Once we create an external virtual network, now we've created that possibility. We have one MAC address here, and mind you, this totally depends on your hypervisor technology now. But we have one MAC address here, and as soon as we attach a virtual machine, we have another MAC address here on this virtual NIC. And as soon as we attach another virtual machine, we have another MAC address here on this virtual NIC. So now we've gone from one MAC address to 1, 2, 3 MAC addresses, and that's going to get picked up and most likely blocked by our MAC address filtering.